Peter, I've been looking forward to this one for a while. You seem like quite the character on social media, a lot of posts.
I've been in this industry for nigh on 30 years, and like a lot of people, I just sort of stumbled upon it. We have such a diverse market in this country and so many options to take, but I learned more in failure than I ever have done in success. To speak up, to make change, to make a difference. Out of every crisis, there's opportunities. Legal tax planning, should I make it absolutely confirmed. Bless her, my wife's extremely tolerant at some 20 plus years. You only get out of life what you put into life. Communication. My biggest asset is my voice. It's too easy to admit defeat. Laughter is a great endorphin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's podcast hosted by myself, Tariq Tohala at Navigate Finance, your real estate finance partner where you can realize your potential. Today, we're joined here by Peter Izard. He's the head of Intermediary Business Development. Peter, how are you doing?
Yes, very well, thank you, Tariq. Very well. It's been an interesting day, weather-wise, but delighted to be here with you and delighted to be able to host you in our offices here in London.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's not quite the weather you'd get in South Africa. This is a South African bank, of course, but we all have to, get used to it over here.
Well, we're used to it. I'm privileged enough to sometimes go to see my colleagues in South Africa and both Johannesburg and Cape Town, and I think you can fairly safely say that the climate differentials are all there for us to see, but wonderful country, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just coming into the building, it's a lovely location you have in central London. It's a fantastic building, and as you enter, you're struck by the zebra in the hallway, and of course a lot of artwork. I'm wondering if there's any significance to the zebra or the artwork or anything like that.
Very interestingly, so we're proud of our heritage. We're dual listed on both the South African and the London Stock Exchange. But Investec was founded in South Africa, and the renaissance of the zebra is the fact that, as I'm sure everyone knows, zebras are unique. There is no such thing as two similar or two the same zebras. Their stripings are all slightly different. And we love that because it reminds us of our origins, but we try and be unique as well, in a sense of we do try and teach or keep our customers as unique as possible. Not one customer is the same as the next. So we try and be as bespoke and as individual and as unique as we can. And I think that's where the zebra plays into that heritage, but has that natural theme. And you know what? No one doesn't like a zebra. It's one of those animals in life that, you can be very agnostic to. Some animals you love, some you don't. But everyone seems to love the zebras. And, I'm certainly one of those as well.
Yeah, definitely. Zebras are quite unique and quite rare, So, it's good. It's a good market differential.
Yeah.
And, Peter, I've been looking forward to this one for a while. You seem like quite the character on social media, a lot of posts. And of course, I came here in the barbecue that you had for intermediaries. I think, was it back in July? June.
Yeah. Wow. Time flies when you're having fun.
Time flies because that feels like only a couple of months ago. And now, we're sitting in the beginning of November. And but it was a fantastic day. You guys really look after all your stakeholders, clearly. And it was a great speech by you as well. We all enjoyed that. So we just like to learn a bit more about yourself as well, Peter. And, critically, we've noticed and everyone's noticed that everybody's journey in this industry is quite unique. And it would be interesting to just understand a bit more about, your journey so far, what pivotal moments you experienced that kind of led you in this trajectory.
Well, thank you, Tariq. I won't give you a sort of blow-by-blow CV critique, but I've been in this industry for nigh on 30 years, and like a lot of people, I just sort of stumbled upon it when I left, having done my A-levels. I knew I wanted to go into the working world rather than down the university route. And after a number of different career paths, I first went into the sort of financial services world on pensions and life insurance and investments, etc. And whilst I enjoyed that, the thing that really pricked my interest was lending, because people don't wake up one day saying, do you know what, I must get life insurance, or I really must sort out my pension. Now, we know they should, but they don't. But what they do wake up one day is saying, I found my dream home, or, I found my dream investment from a buy-to-let perspective. And off the back of that comes all the ancillary opportunities such as protection and financial advice. So it very quickly became apparent to me that mortgages, far from being sort of unflattering or unsexy, are something that we all need and continue to need. So I very quickly sort of centered into that area of mortgages, etc. And then starting up with larger companies or smaller companies, I sort of fell into the world of looking after mortgage brokers. Because the market is predicated by the fact that actually mortgage brokers are intrinsically linked to the success or the failure of the market. We have such a diverse market in this country and so many options to take that it's a whirlwind. You do need to take professional advice from a decent whole of market intermediary. And so I've always plowed that furrow in the sense of, working in this industry, which is unduly complex, positive in a way that there are so many options. You do need that advice. And so I've worked in the building society sector. I've worked in the large corporates over the Halifax Bank of Scotland world, if that makes sense, set up intelligent finance, the offset lender, which was fantastic. But my biggest learning curve of all before Investec was when we unsuccessfully, but tried to set up a brand new lender, Portillion. Our timing was unfortunate because this was literally, we started the company just before Northern Rock went, and then when Lehman's went, less than a year later, we were in a massive form of a massive credit crisis. And getting authorization for new lenders was nigh on impossible. In fact, there wasn't any. But I learned more in failure than I ever have done in success. So that's an interesting piece. And from there, sort of again, one of the many moves was into the high net worth space with Harrods Bank. And that led me on to Investec some 10 years ago. And the rest, they say, is history. And I think that what the high net worth sector taught me was mortgages are mortgages, whether they're big or small. But I suppose I got into a sector where I thought to myself, I'd much rather do smaller number of mortgages at larger value than actually doing the retail option of lots of mortgages at smaller values. And the complexity and the information that's needed on that really did prize my interest. So the last probably 11 years, I've concentrated in that sort of private bank, that high net worth sector.
Yeah, absolutely. I can echo that sentiment. Working in the high net worth, let's say, realm of mortgages, lending, products is a very intricate process. You really have to be quite sharp because these people are very academic and sophisticated when it comes to financials anyways. So you've got to be on the ball, and it is quite exhilarating. So no, it's definitely shared sentiments. And also what you said earlier, I think we definitely do learn a lot from our failures, more so than our successes. And that's always part of the journey for anybody in any sector. So it's interesting to hear that. And it would just be good to know a little bit more about Investec. Obviously, it's South African bank. You've got big office here in the UK. What can you tell us about the culture here? Because when I come here, I always feel quite a strong culture. I know quite a few people here, yourself, Chris, Amy Backhouse, Andy Jones. I've dealt with you guys over the years, and it's always a pleasure. But I wonder if there are any, specific cultural benchmarks that have been established here at Investec.
No, Tariq, I think it's an interesting question, and it's one that really attracted me to the organization in the first place. Having worked for big and small corporates, the building society sector. When I came to Investec, even from day one interview process, the interview process was like nothing else I'd experienced before. Once they'd established that I had the ability, the technical ability to do the job, the 4 or 5 interviews that followed weren't to re-establish that, were to check that culturally you would be a good fit for the team and for the organization. That was like nothing else been before, if that makes sense. So Investec is somewhere where it's a unique place from my perspective, in that they want personalities. They don't want people that will toe the, of course you have to toe the line from a regulatory perspective and things, but they want personalities. So I'm proud to run a team of 6, and they're 6 very individual people, both from a race perspective, from a religious perspective, from their backgrounds, from where they've come from. And I love that multicultural basis, which we as an organization thrive upon, because our founding members had that entrepreneurial spirit from when they first started, and that still seeps through today. And so not only are we as staff encouraged to be entrepreneurially minded in our outset, to speak up, to make change, to make a difference, I think that's then resonated in the fact of how we help our intermediary partners and how we help our clients. So if you talk about the barbecue, for example, I think we try and do things differently, if that makes sense. You talk about how I was able to address we're not here to, sit down with a 28-minute PowerPoint presentation as to, we're here to, envelop our story. And I think our success with our intermediaries and our clients is that the deep-rooted relationships that we bring to bear. Because without the intermediaries, we don't get the clients. But we have to work in partnership. So every successful transaction that we undertake, there's a client, there's an intermediary, and there's us. And if we work in unison and we work collaboratively, we can be very successful. But we never underestimate the importance of each of those sectors, if that makes sense, Because what do we want? A great outcome for our clients, if that makes sense. And our clients, who we understand are time poor, very entrepreneurially minded, are seeking the services of a professional. So let's work in tandem. And I think that Investec implores that and knows that. So for me, in summary, Investec's culture is one of entrepreneurial free spirit, if that makes sense. I truly believe every day I come to work, I can make a difference. I can stand up, I can be heard, if that makes sense. I can go and, if I wanted to, go and talk to the CEO directly. Yes, maybe I'd have to make an appointment because she's a very busy lady. But I whether it be from top to bottom, I can talk to people, I can make a difference. And all the time I can make a difference, fantastic. The day I come to Investec and I feel I can't add value, I can't make a difference, will be a dark day, will be a sad day, and it'll be a day where I'll have to turn around and say, my time has ended. But from the day one to the thing here, I make a difference. And that's what's so impassioned, and that's what comes out from me. And I haven't had that always in other organizations.
Well, that's a very interesting point you bring up. I think having a certain element of autonomy in what you do professionally is critical, because it's not only liberating, it's empowering, and ultimately, everyone has such an incredible value to bring to the table, and to have all sorts of perspectives is unique. And speaking of perspectives, I'd actually like to know a bit more about how you found the industry in the last 12 months. What have been, with rising interest rates, we had about 14 hikes in a row. Thankfully, it looks like that's stabilized for now. Let's hope we are. There are some economic and political externalities happening currently, but I'd like to just understand, how you guys have navigated that turbulent climate, and where you see the industry going really in the next, 12 months ahead of us, really.
Well, I think the starting point from that is that I think we need to look back rather than just 12 months. So if you look back over the last 5 years, we've had a series of major crises. Of course, not only, we've had Brexit, which we had to overcome as a company, as an economy, if that makes sense. And once we'd overcome Brexit, then we went into lockdown, unprecedented, worldwide pandemic, if that makes sense. I mean, how we turned this bank to everybody remote working in 24 hours, quite incredible.
Yeah.
And how we did things that we'd never thought we could do, but we had to, like other organizations, of course. But we thrived and we gained from that, and how we came back from that, for example. And then, of course, we've had the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We've had the rising inflation and the effects of that, and the rising interest rates, etc. And of course, we come to our current situation. So it seems to be that there's been one after the other, if that makes sense. But I think one thing I've learned with Investec is that out of every crisis, there's opportunities. So what do you think to do? Do you hibernate and say to yourself, oh, it's a tough market, we can't do anything? Or do you turn around and say it's a tough market, but in tough markets, entrepreneurs thrive? And I think that's what we've always had, that mantle, if that makes sense, because our clients are entrepreneurially minded, and so we need to be.
Yeah.
So if we talk specifically over the last 12 months, where a lot of the peers that I've worked with, many of the broker firms I've worked with, have never experienced a rising rate market. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to know when interest rates were 15%.
Yeah.
So at 5%, they're positively low, but they're positively high relative speaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think what we've got to do, we've got to work with people. We've got to work with, a constant education piece. But of course, the other thing is as well that in this world now where it's a 24-hour news, the social media, everything's at the push of a button. I think sometimes we can talk ourselves down as an economy. We can talk ourselves down as a nation, but there's so many things that are positive. And actually, do I think we're near the peak? Yes, I do. Have we reached a peak? It's too early to say. But I think there was always a time when we had to realize we'd have to eke ourselves away from a low interest rate environment, if that makes sense. But the fundamentals are still there. We don't build enough houses in this country. Supply and demand inadequacies are going to continue to grow and still get worse, if that makes sense. We still ultimately strive to own our own property, big or small, if that makes sense. And the private rental sector still needs to be able to meet the demands that it's got.
Yeah.
So I suppose what we're trying to say is that, the UK is a place where people want to invest. We've got, one of the leading legal basis of which, is the envy of the world. English law is still the pivotal. If you buy a property in the UK, you've got safe security. We've got an educational system that is as good as anywhere. And we're in a world where people transition, whatever race or color or religion or ethnicity you are, London's very much a multicultural, multifaceted place where people thrive and want to do business in. It straddles 2 time zones, and dare I say it, the climate, generally speaking, is not extreme.
Yeah.
I will caveat, maybe that's not always
from
the
where
case.
we were earlier.
From where we were.
Yeah.
So if we take all of those fundamentals, our client base see London as a place they want to do business, a place that they want to live predominantly, and they want to thrive from. If we hold true to those scenarios, it's harder, unequivocally, yes, but it's harder for everybody, if that makes sense, Yeah. And as long as we can be forthright with ourselves and say there are opportunities out there, then we'll thrive, if that makes sense. Yes, it's harder. The market's dramatically down, if that makes sense. But let's be positive, rates have stabilized. Lenders are cutting rates all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There are opportunities out there. we've got to work with our intermediaries and their clients to spot those opportunities and assist, if that makes sense. And we've got to hope that our peer sector can do exactly the same.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, it's definitely, and you're absolutely right. You know, it's not just been in the last 24 months, but there's been a series of, you know, let's say hurdles that we've all had to, you know, overcome in recent years. And, you know, as a result, there has been a certain strain in this industry in particular. But again, you've also mentioned the resilience of the property market in the UK. You know, it's to lots of challenges. It's gone through loads of challenges in the past, and it's just doing the same thing now. One theme I'd like to touch on in particular is really the buy-to-let market, specifically in London. You know, that's, you know, where rental yields are so tight, and, you know, to meet affordability criteria is the ultimate challenge for most buy-to-let lenders in this market. How has that been, you know, looked at or mediated by, you know, the guys at Investec? What is the appetite? How can we get around something like that?
Sure. So I think that it's a mark. The buy-to-let market is predicated by the need to have debt, if that makes sense, because this is a business transaction, and you know, debt is by far from a dirty word. It's a function that is absolutely essential in order for any business. And let's face it, professional buy-to-let landlords are entrepreneurially minded, but they're business people. And we mustn't lose sight of that fact. And of course, the rising interest rate environment and the low yields has made that, you know, that sort of positive storm of conflicting areas. And I think what lenders and ourselves are doing, and I can only specifically talk for ourselves ultimately, is that, you know, you can't have a one-size-fits-all, if that makes sense. So, yeah, the yields are so low, the rates are so high that most won't fit from a simple yield perspective, if that makes sense, you know. So then what you've got to do, then you've got to look deeper down and turn around and say, what is the client's wider net assets? What is the client's wider wealth? And where is the client going, if that makes sense, you know? So, you know, we're seeing a move into the HMO space, for example. We're moving, you know, and I think we're also looking at some of our buy-to-let clients who, you know, will see opportunities. They're seeing, you know, properties come to market at prices that do make sense, if that makes sense. And we're certainly seeing a move away from the smaller buy-to-let landlord. You know, affectionately, I call the dinner buy-to-let landlord who, you know, 20 years ago thought it was a good idea and bought up one or two buy-to-lets. That sector's now shrinking. And we're professionalizing it more, which has to be a good thing. Let's not lose sight of that. So I think what we have to do is, it comes back to this entrepreneurial spirit. We have to be able to turn around and say, look at each case on its own merits, look at the client's wider assets, wider income basis, and they have to be creative. You know, can we put money on account? You know, is it in, you know, are they going down a sort of limited company route, if that makes sense? Do we put cash on deposit, you know, for example, to appease that? Not all the time will it be possible, but we also have to look at, you know, you have to look at both the client and the asset as well. So, you know, the really highly professional, successful buy-to-let landlords that we're seeing are thriving in this market and seeing opportunity, if that makes sense. And we've got to work with those to try and help them. But also as well, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be able to, you know, and very difficult as this is, we do see some clients who we think to ourselves, the business model for their particular area is fundamentally flawed. And actually, then you've got to have that hard work that turns around and says, I can't support your model in the current environment that it is. It's not sustainable, if that makes sense. So it's difficult, you know. But I think that, you know, we still need somewhere to live. And, you know, the perfect storm of rising interest rates means that landlords are having to put up rents, if I mean, and it's that perfect storm, isn't it? If that makes sense. But we still need somewhere to live, whether we are buying, whether we are renting. So the demand is still there. And perhaps, dare I say it, more that, there's an issue here for government as well. We need more of a joined up thinking.
Yeah.
And of course, if you want one last piece, we are going to be going into a change of government potentially in the next 12 months or so. So what opportunities or issues does that provide? We don't know. Categorically, we don't know. But what I do know is that the property sector is always front and center of any sort of incumbent political persuasion when it comes to a general election.
Yeah, and as it should be, and it'll be interesting to see if the government can, help in these circumstances, because there seems to be a slight disconnect, especially when it comes to buy-to-let landlords. I feel like, they've kind of almost had to adapt.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned, the shift towards HMOs. And there's a number of reasons why that's happening, right? Firstly, it's becoming more and more expensive to rent property, particularly in London. So there's a lot more of a demand for it. It makes sense in these tighter economic circumstances. And I think in that context, the buy-to-let landlord can get the returns that they were used to back before rates were where they are now. So very interesting that, we've looked into that. I think, speaking of, so obviously buy-to-let is a product that you do here at Investec, buy-to-let mortgages. What other products and services are on offer really at Investec?
Well, so in Investec, okay, no means unique position, but it's in a position of strength in the sense of we have two distinct propositions. So we have what we call our private bank franchise, where we look after clients from a lending perspective, both on a personal level, so for their main residence or holiday home, and from a buy-to-let landlord perspective. We help our clients save, move money through transactional FX and transactional banking, which we would know as sort of current accounts, etc. So from a private client franchise, whether they want to own a property from a personal or business perspective, whether they want to move money, save money, or we can help in all of those type of regards, if that makes sense. We also have our wealth division, which now is merged with Rathbones, and that takes care of all of the clients' financial planning aspects, whether it be investments or pensions, etc. So that's another aspect, if that makes sense. But we also have what we call a corporate bank. And the corporate bank helps with mergers and acquisitions and corporate finance, and sort of foreign exchange opportunities, but rather than from a personal perspective, from a business perspective, if that makes sense. So whether a client is looking to require financial assistance on a personal level or on a corporate level, we can help. And I think where we want to increase our capability is that behind every corporate client, there are individuals who have their own personal requirements, if that makes sense. So whilst we operate as an organization in silos from a specialist perspective, I think what we're getting far more collaborative and far more opportunistic is it turns around and says, if we close a deal with our corporate cousins, we are then passing the details of the individuals behind that deal to our private client franchise to turn around and say, well, look, you trust us with your business finance. Why can't we see if we can assist you on the personal front? But vice versa as well. If we've just provided finance for an individual for their main residence, for example, and they're a business owner, can we then instigate and assist their business and their colleagues in our corporate division, if that makes sense? So whilst we want to keep the specialists very separate, we want to have that joined up collegiative aspect that turns around and says, clients are clients, and whether they be corporate or private, we try and serve that. But I think one of the other massive successes of Investec is that we know where we can add value and do, but we don't try and be everything to all men and women.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So what we specialize in, we specialize in. Where we don't specialize, we don't try.
Yeah.
Because, so underlying all of this, we only serve the needs of high net worth clients.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to be everything to everyone, if that means. We know our sector, and that's where we specialize in. And I think that's reassuring as well. So from my perspective, we only deal with clients with a minimum income of net income of over 300,000 and net assets of 3 million.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, No disrespect, we serve that sector and we serve it very, very well, if that makes sense. But we don't try and interfere where our retail cousins do, where, you could be a first-time buyer earning 50,000, if that makes sense. It's not an area that we serve.
Sure.
It's not precociousness. It's just expertise.
Yeah. So in the high net worth marketplace, it feels like it's quite a holistic, banking service covering, private banking, corporate banking, commercial banking. So it's very, very useful, I'm sure, for your clients. And speaking of your clients, what is your typical clientele apart from obviously what you've just defined as high net worth client? Where are they from? What jurisdictions are you comfortable with dealing with?
Well, it's very interesting because we see some common traits in our clients. Certainly in my franchise, in the private client franchise. So from a nationality perspective, they're multinational, if that makes sense. So we see country of birth or nationality is not a barrier, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing that we again do insist on is that all of our clients are UK resident. So unfortunately, we don't have the expertise, the desire, the willingness, or the appetite to assist clients who are not UK residents.
Right.
Okay. So that's again one of the things that we know what we can add value. We know where we can't add value. Saying that, the nationality, we do a lot of American clients. We do a lot of worldwide clients, a lot of Europeans. And we do also see London being the financial services capital of the world that it is. We see a lot of, cross-jurisdictional clients moving to London. For example, if you take the big American investment banks, for example, many of their staff relocate from New York to London for 5 or 10 years. They bring their children over, they bring their spouses over, and we have that expertise to assist with them for the time they're over here, if that makes sense. So that's one key common denominator. Another key denominator I see is that many of our clients, whether they work in an environment where they're in an employed position, whether they work for an investment bank, or whether they are self-employed and entrepreneurial, their mindset is that we bank clients who are actively creating wealth through earned income. If that makes sense. Whether it be through businesses or whether it be through, that they're working in an employed environment, if that makes sense. So they are building their wealth, not through inheritance, not through old money, through new money. They're building it from scratch, if that makes sense, and that's a common denominator. So we see their sort of, I suppose our average client is 30 to 50, 30 to 55. And we're in that sort of aggregated, that sort of, wealth accumulation through earnings, if that makes sense. So they've come from here and they're going to there, for example. Now, some of our private banks will deal with the landed gentry, more the old wealth, the wealth preservation, if that makes sense, where we're more entrepreneurially minded wealth creation journey, if that makes sense, And the other thing I see a lot with our clients is that they're predominantly very highly educated. They've gone to university. They've invested their time and effort in their specialist area, if that makes sense, Or if they haven't, they've invested their time in homing their skill set. A lot of our buy-to-let clients, for example, have been professional buy-to-let landlords growing from very small landlords right the way through over 20 years, if that makes sense. They've invested, they've put their life and soul into their business. And as such, they are subject matter experts in their field, if that makes sense. We really see that. And above all else as well, whatever role they're in, I see they are entrepreneurially minded.
Yeah.
So they see debt as an opportunity to make money. So debt, far from being a dirty word, they see it as a vehicle by which they can accumulate wealth. And so whether they be in that sort of, that semi-commercial world, or whether they be, a partner of a law firm or a C-suite chief executive, for example, their earnings complexity, it doesn't fit the sort of square peg round hole, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
So they have income from various different sources. Tax planning is at the heart of their mind. Legal tax planning, should I make it absolutely confirmed. But their income sources come from foreign income, from vesting shares, from, the money's in the business, but to take it out will incur a tax liability. So at the forefront of their mind, they want to maximize their tax planning. They have complex earnings, but they have that entrepreneurial mindset that turns around and says, there's an opportunity for me here, but I need the debt to be able to fulfill that opportunity.
Yeah.
Or I have money invested in my business, which I can take out, but I will incur a tax liability, which then negates the opportunity in itself.
Yeah.
So they see Investec and other providers as that conduit to turn around and say, there's an opportunity here. I need to work together to fulfill that opportunity. So we're on that. We know our clients well enough to turn around and say, let us go on that journey with you to facilitate that opportunity. And that's where the real success lies.
Yeah. There's one product of yours that I'm not sure a lot of people know about, which I think is quite interesting for those who want to have, let's say, maneuverability in the market, at least in the real estate sphere, and that's the revolver. Can you tell us a bit more about that product?
Yeah, so the revolver is, unfortunately, is only available in the it's not available in the buy-to-let world, if that makes sense, yet. I mean, that's not to say that it wouldn't be in the future, but the revolver mortgage, if you think of the revolver as a secured overdraft.
Right.
Okay, so very popular for our private equity clients, especially, where you would effectively seek a revolving mortgage facility from us. And let's just say that the facility was 5 million, if that makes sense. It's secured against a first charge against your main residence, or predominantly your main residence, if that makes sense. And then the facility turns around and says, well, look, for the next 10 years, we're going to provide you with a facility of up to whatever amount it was. I said 5 million. It could be that. And then you can draw up to or draw down on that facility within those terms as many times as you like.
Right.
So day one, I've got a facility of 5 million, but I only need 1 million. You draw down 1 million and you pay interest on that 1 million, if that makes sense. Then 6 months later, I need another 2 million. I'm only paying interest on my 3 million. 6 months later, actually, I've had a liquidity event. I don't need that 3 million. I'm going to pay back 1 million. So it's a bit, hence why I use the word secured overdraft, if that makes sense. But you've got access to liquidity in a very short space of time, within days, if that makes sense. Now, that means that if you are in private equity or other aspects, you have the ability at very short notice to get your hands on liquidity, which is an absolute key in this market.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and a lot of our private equity clients, for example, they might need to invest into their private equity funds, for example, an opportunity comes up and they've got to liquidate very quickly. if that makes sense. That's where a revolver is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or for other clients where they are seeing an opportunity, for example, let's say an investment opportunity comes up at short notice. Time is money.
Yeah.
But actually missing out on that because of the failure to raise the capital quickly enough is an absolute problem. So that's where the revolver it's there. It's fairly unique, but not completely unique in the market. And where it's really popular for a lot of our clients is that they do it as part of an overall holistic mortgage opportunity.
Yeah.
So if, for example, I might then turn around and say, if I'm borrowing 5 million in total, I might put 2 million on a revolver facility, and then I might put the rest on a fixed facility, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I can have a hybrid now. I can have a truly bespoke mortgage offering that turns around and says, I can have 3 of it fixed, I can have 2 of it on the revolver, which is on a floating rate, if that makes sense, And that way I can then turn around and say, I've got the flexibility of an instant facility at a slightly higher rate, but I've hedged myself that I've got an element of it on a fixed rate. So I've got that security of knowing that my payments don't change. And I think that's where the bespoke nature of our offering really comes to the fore, in the sense of we can do any kinds of those type of different scenarios. Yeah. It's truly bespoke.
It is. It is. And I do think it's a fantastic product because, for the opportunistic investor that is looking for, a great opportunity and needs to move quickly, they do have that, maneuverability in the market to access liquidity within days, as you say. Are there, in this instance, any applicable non-utilization fees?
No, the good news is there are no non-utilization fees at all, which is fairly unique in that. I will caveat that the revolver mortgages does come with a higher rate than its equivalent on a standard first charge mortgage, and it can't be fixed. It's 100% a floating rate, so it is subject to the vagrancies of bank base, if that makes sense. The loan to value that we can offer on a revolver would be reduced somewhat because of the nature of the flexibility of the product, if that makes sense. But as part of an overall blended opportunity, I think it's very creative, if that makes sense. It's not right for everybody, but I think it's nice to have it in the tool for the intermediary to be able to say to their client, Mr. Client, if I explain the opportunity that's there, it's part of an overall package.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, for me, I think that our world is best explained by, we are the Savile Row of the tailoring industry. This suit is from Charles Tyrwhitt. Okay, it's off the peg. They're a great company. I'm very happy with the suits that I have there, for example. It fits quite well. But and it's a premium, but it's not an ultra premium. But I've always dreamt of going to Savile Row and having a bespoke tailor-made suit, for example, that I know will cost more, if that makes sense. But from going in there, it will be made to measure. I will have it, bespoke to my specific requirements in every minute detail, if that makes sense. Now, our clients will go to the Savile Row, if that makes sense. And yes, whilst they know the cost will be higher, the benefits will be hugely beneficial, and it's something worth paying from their perspective, if that makes sense. Because the one thing that is absolutely certain is that our clients are not only entrepreneurially minded, but they're very time poor.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so they will pay a premium for that service. They'll pay a premium for the ability to be able to turn around and say, I'm buying this property, but the issue is it's got 2 kitchens. It's got large acreages. I need it in a structure that is legally more complex, if I mean, whatever it may be. Okay. And I think just like a tailor can bespoke a suit to your specific requirements, we can do the same. And I think it's a fantastic analogy and people that understand.
Yeah.
We don't all go to Savile Row, but the ones that do go to Savile, they go there for a reason. Our clients come to us for a reason. That's not to say they can't get served with the retail fraternity, and if they can, they will. But there are so many reasons why they can't, very genuine reasons.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we're here to assist and help.
Oh, that's a great analogy. And, everyone wants a nice suit in the end of the day, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, Peter, just moving away from, Investec and this industry in general, it'll be nice to know a little bit more about yourself again, and, what kind of things had inspired you so far? Like, are there any influential figures or people in your life so far that have inspired you to maybe take this path, or just in general as well?
Sure. Well, a little bit about myself. I'm married. I've got a very happily married. Bless her. My wife's extremely tolerant of some 20 plus years, albeit we've been together now nearly 30. So wow. She's an absolute rock for me. I've got 2 boys. They're growing up now, so 20 and 16. So family is a very important part of my life. And I think that, I always think to myself, you always try and give your children as much as what you got yourselves, if that makes sense. But the actual, the simple economics of life that turns around and says hard work will pay dividends, if that makes sense. But it starts with education. And we're very lucky with the fact that our boys have listened and so far taken on board that, and they're good lads, if that makes sense. Most parents would say the same, but I think it's genuine in my case. And all I think you can ever do is you can guide them. Yeah. You can put them on a path of guidance, but ultimately, they have to fly the nest, and they have to find their own way. Yeah. I'm a qualified football referee, which is my passion outside of work, and very different to I tend to do adult male football at semi-professional level, and I use a skill set from work sometimes, managing a team, onto the field of play. But sometimes what I learn on the field of play, I can bring into my work as well, if that makes sense.
I'm sure, yeah.
A very, very different kind of pressure, if that makes sense, and can be, in the time of the heat of the moment, can really get your pulse racing.
I can imagine.
But actually, it's great because it's make sure that I try and keep as fit as I can. Yeah. Because unfortunately, I'm getting older; they're getting younger.
Doesn't look like it, Peter.
Thank you. But the paths are ever crossing. Yeah. But going back to words of advice, etc. I think I've been privileged to work with some fantastic people, some great organizations, and some great leaders. And I think what I find is that you take a little bit of the positives in all of them, don't you? And then you try and mold that into yourself. But I always know that, back in the day, I was always perhaps more luck than judgment, for example. In my early career days, was sent on a path of, nothing comes easy, So you only get out of life what you put into life, if that makes sense,
Absolutely.
And I think that served me well. I think honest and integrity, if nothing else, if you ask my team that they'll be, that if something's got to be said that isn't particularly pleasant, we'll say it. Yeah, if that makes sense. You know, but I'd encourage them to say it back to me as much as in a two-way sort of process.
100%. Yeah.
If you can't be honest with yourself, you can't be honest with your team, and I think that's very, very important. You know, but the other thing that I always think is that a wise old owl who's no longer with us, but many years ago said, if you're dealing with the intermediary market, always remember that it comes back to this partnership, this relationship piece, if that makes sense. Communication.
Communication, transparency, it's critical. And I can imagine, this must, be a common thing in between what you do on an everyday basis and even, refereeing in football, right? It's
if you when I'm on a pitch, my biggest asset is my voice. Yeah. Okay. No, if you're giving a penalty, okay, right? No one wants you to give a penalty. They're going to be roaring at you, for example. If you're clear in your decision making, and you articulate why, whilst they may not accept it, they'll appreciate that the fact is that that's why you've done that, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, so communication, pre, post, pre, during, post game is absolutely key. Now I take that into my working world and say exactly the same. Now, let me give you, Tariq, a couple of really specific examples.
Yeah, sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If we've got 3 people in this relationship, we've got a mortgage intermediary, we've got a client, and we've got a lender, in this case in Investec, if that makes sense. The intermediary has got to keep the client informed, and we've got to keep both informed, if that makes sense. And so I spend my life educating my team of bankers and business development managers that turns around and says, any lack of communication or that void, that silence, is deafening.
Yeah.
So I'm a great believer that you can't over communicate, but you can under communicate.
Yeah.
So set expectations that are both realistic and honest, and say to your client and to your intermediary, right, the next steps are this, okay, and constantly check in, if that makes sense. If I get an inquiry from an intermediary and I can't help with it, sort of thing, don't dilly-dally around for days trying to find an option. Go back and turn around and say, look, I can't help. These are the reasons why, if that makes sense. A quick no rather than a long drawn-out no has always served me very well. And I don't think people do that enough. They say maybe, and a maybe is a delayed yes, but 3 weeks down the road. And now everybody's poorer for the whole experience, and they're really quite aggravated from it.
Yeah. Sure.
So communication is absolutely king there, if that makes sense. And I think I learned that very early on, and it served me well. And I think that honesty, so when you've got to communicate something that people don't want to hear, then you've got to be straight.
Yeah.
Integrity is absolutely key.
It's critical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm dealing with intermediaries, they've got a stakeholder at the end that they've got to deal with. So whilst I want to have that joined up relationship that turns around and says, whilst I have to deal with you, the intermediary, and so I should, and I want to, I've also got to keep the client informed. So that triangular piece, if that makes sense. Look, the successful part of my marriage, ups or downs, etc., is that my wife and I have always worked as a team.
Yeah.
And we've always communicated with each other. And if you can take that into your business world and vice versa, and if in my particular sense, if I can take that into the world on a Saturday at 3:00 onto the pitch, won't always get it right, won't always get it, I'll often make mistakes. But again, if I make the mistake on the field of play, you diffuse the situation very quickly when you turn around and say, you're right, fella, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
What? A referee's admitting they've made a mistake,
Well, I wish they did that more in the Premier League. We don't see enough of that in professional football these days. But
Exactly.
it's very interesting to see all the synergies, when it comes to communication and, honesty, integrity in all, realms of your life, professional, when it comes to football, refereeing and with your wife and your relationship is, and I think it's quite universal for all people. These are critical elements that I think we should all have, because I don't think anybody likes sitting in the realm of uncertainty or lack of clarity.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. And thanks for, sharing that with us. So Peter, could your younger self have, foreseen where you are today? And if not, what are the key differences in what you expected and your current reality?
Oh, crikey, no, that's a
tough
question
one.
and a half, isn't it? Sort of, I think to myself that I'm deep into my philosophy and psychology and thing. And so I tend to turn around and say, look, we're richer if we learn from history. We're richer if we learn from our mistakes. It comes back to the point about, that 5 years trying to start a new lender and ultimately failing, if that makes sense. I learned more in those 5 years as part of a management team that unsuccessfully didn't launch than I've ever done before.
Yeah,
absolutely. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think I look back and turn around and say, we should learn, and we should galvanize ourselves to accept that we're not always going to get it right. And, management issues or I'm a great believer in looking back and turn around and say, what could I have done differently? And learning from that, if that makes sense. And actually, instead of beating yourself up, learning from that and correcting it. But if I look back at my younger self and say, what would I have done differently? Maybe I think you can. The one thing you can't do in life is have regrets.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it will just turn yourself up, and you won't be able to. Regrets are. I can't change what's gone on, but I can direct the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think whilst you've always got to have that ability to look back, learn from it when you're looking forward.
Yeah.
If that makes sense,
Yeah.
But the other thing I suppose I have learned as well is try and find a reason to do something rather than a reason not to. I lost both parents relatively young, and I want to know that whilst I lost them, when I say relatively young, I think the life that they had was a fulfilled life, if that makes sense. So I say to myself, and I try and say to my children and whatever, find a reason to do something than not, within practical. Live for today, but also for the future.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to a financial perspective as well, it's how do you get that balance right, if that makes sense. So whilst I don't advocate that, right, I'm going to, spend everything I've saved because I don't know where I'm going to be there. That ability to have that, the opportunity to save for the future, but live for today as well. It's always a quandary that we're all fighting against, if that makes sense, But don't have regrets,
Absolutely, yeah.
But but regrets are just delayed opportunities for me.
Of course, you know, and I really resonate with that because the present is a gift, right?
Yeah.
And we must embrace it as much as possible. Tomorrow is never a guarantee. However, as you say, in this philosophy, we must always plan for the future, and the past is something we can't change. And I think asking yourself what you would have done differently, or if you have any regrets, I personally don't believe in, just because some mistakes that people make in their lives are actually quite critical.
Yeah.
Some failures are quite critical because it's the afterthought and the reflection which leads on to better decisions, more informed decisions that lead to where you are today. So it's all part of a journey. And if you could go back in time and change a few things, you might not end up where you want to be. So it's very much part of the process. So it's very insightful to hear
but
that.
Just one other thing to add as well is that whilst I try and physically keep myself in the best shape because for my refereeing, etc., and whilst we all should, I think sometimes and this is probably the thing that I take greatest pride in, is the mental side. So mental self-awareness in this country has never been higher than it has now, if that makes sense, and gone are the days when the old adage, sort of man up, pull yourself together, you know what I mean, etc., are hopefully evading, if I think there's a way to go. And I think to myself that one thing that's always served me so well is having that positive mental attitude. Easier said than done. But at times when things have been tough, at times when, the going has got tough, if that makes sense. And, no more so than in today's market. We talked about that, if that makes sense, It's too easy to admit defeat. It's too easy to turn around and say, well, look, the market's down, interest rate, I can't do things. I've tried to train myself, and I try to and bring this into my children, my colleagues, etc., is that, there is always a way. It's corny, and it's easy to say that. And look, I'm sitting with a great company in a privileged background that I've worked hard for, and there are people out there struggling, etc. But I think if you have the right mindset, if that makes sense, there are opportunities. So we all go to the gym for our physical well-being. We go running or whatever exercise we do. don't underestimate the power and the opportunity and the essentialness of, that mental well-being as well as that physical well-being, and how the two are absolutely entwined.
Yeah,
if it makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I do implore people, if you are suffering from the mental side, for example, if I've got a physical ailment, I'll go to the doctors and I'll try and seek a remedy. I implore you to seek that remedy from a mental perspective as much, because it's just one of those things that's hidden.
Yeah.
Don't talk to people and seek help.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, because a problem shared is always a problem halved.
Absolutely.
It sounds corny, but it's so.
But it's true, and they say that for a reason. And there's not one person in this world that's immune to mental health crisis of some proportion. And as you say, there's been a lot more awareness these days, and positivity is quite a significant attribute to have. And I think you mentioned the analogy of going to the gym. I think even just being positive is a muscle that you train, and over time, with that right mindset and attitude, positivity itself can take you so far. And it's very, very interesting that you touch on, themes of mental
laughing. You talk to my 16-year-old son, and he'll say to Dad, you said you're always got a smile on your face, you're always laughing, or what's funny about that, for example.
Yeah.
And I try and say to him, look, laughter is a great endorphin that it makes you feel positive, if that makes sense. So find what's a positive in any situation, for example.
Yeah.
So yes, the weather's awful at the moment, but it could be worse.
It can always be worse.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and it's great for the gardens, and it's great for our reservoirs, and do you know what I mean? It's what's the mindset, if that makes sense, and it's training your brain to turn around and say, yes, that's that, but what's the upside? There's always upsides. If I mean, even in your darkest hour, there's an upside. But how do you train yourself to get to that upside? Yeah, is the key.
It's an incredible force if you can do, though. Yeah. It's an incredible force. So, thank you. I think with all of our podcasts, with the lenders we work with, we always end with the same question.
Okay.
And it's a bit of an interesting one. The question is, if you had £20 million in equity to invest in UK real estate, how would you do it using the products and services that Investec have?
Okay. Wow, that is an interesting one. So first and foremost, I would, assuming that I know what I know, the first thing I would do is I would seek advice, if that makes sense, because I don't have all the answers myself. So I think the first thing to do is to seek the advice of professionals in each sector, if that makes sense. So if I had 20 million to invest, I being able to know, where am I going to put that, if that makes sense. What's going to give me the greatest return, but subject to my risk element, if that makes sense. What's going to be the most tax efficient way of doing that, for example, those type of scenarios where, tax in itself is a specific area where you do need to seek, specialist advice, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But knowing what I do know now, I turn around and say, but if I've got that 20 million to invest, what am I seeking for that to do? What is my horizon timetable? What is my timescales? What do I want out of this, if that makes sense? Is it for inheritance tax planning? What are my timescales? Why am I doing it? And what do I want to achieve out of that, for example? Because I think that you've got to know where the end is for you to be able to go onto that journey. But you've also got to know that what the end might be there, but how you get to it may be a deviated world, if that makes sense. I think I'd also look to do is to turn around and say that, I wouldn't want to take the whole 20 million and put it into one project, for example. So you'd want to deleverage your exposure, let's say, for example. So I think what you would do is that I'd turn around and say, plenty of opportunities, but what's the end journey? Where do I want to get to? Why am I doing this, for example? And then plan around from there. That sounds really corny, for example, but I think what it does is to turn around and say that actually the decisions you make now, the rush, or don't make a rushed decision, make, an all-rounded decision, but huge opportunities. And actually, if we look into the market today, for example, I turn around and say, hypothetically, if I had 20 million of equity to invest, I would be all in today. Because I'd turn around and say there are plenty of opportunities, 100%, if that makes sense, And my entrepreneurially free-spirited mindset would turn around and say, but how do I maximize those, if that makes sense, And what's my end output? What's success look like, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
So, foot on the ball. I love my football analogies, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Rather than going out there and turn and say, right, I'm just going to go and run it, go and try and score, take a deep breath, foot on the ball, right, what's my plan here? And once I've got my plan, then execute it, but be willing to be able to maneuver at short notice.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Foot on the ball analogy is something that always has served me well. Don't just tear off, if that makes sense. Be prepared to have a considered approach.
Yeah.
But also be prepared to move quickly. So whatever's there, but have a plan.
Yeah. Excellent. Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure, incredibly insightful, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this one. And I wish you the most success in the coming year and years to come. Thank you so much for your time.
Same to you, Tariq. Thank you very much for giving me this platform to share my experiences or our experiences, and I look forward to working with you going forward in the months and years ahead, as always has been the case.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If any of the products or services mentioned in this video are of interest to you or anybody in your network, then please do get in contact with us at info@navigatefinance.com, where you'll be put through to an expert advisor who will provide you with everything you need to know and guide you through the process to achieve a cost-effective solution to your inquiry. Thank you.